You're listening to the Ready or Not podcast with me, Mabel Goulden, and today I'm sat with Sarah, who is the owner of a social media agency, FREELANCE, here in Dubai. In this episode, we're going to be talking about everything about the transition to going from working full-time into freelance to starting a small business as an agency owner, and we've also got advice for anybody that's wanting to do the same. I really enjoyed this conversation with Sarah, and I think you'll really love this episode. Hi guys, you're listening to the Ready or Not podcast with me, Mabel Goulden, and today's guest is Sarah, who is the owner of FREELANCE, a social media agency. And thank you, Sarah, for joining me today on my podcast. I'm so excited to have our conversation.
Me too.
Like I said, I wish we had a podcast microphone on last time we spoke, because we have so many shared experiences and similarities in what we're doing. So I'm really excited to get into that with you. So just to introduce how we actually connected, we are in very similar industries, aren't we? Why don't you tell everyone listening what you do?
I own a small agency called FREELANCE, and what we do, we basically just do social media and marketing for the F&B industry. So it's basically just like a social media agency, but it's focused on the F&B industry. So we rarely kind of like branch out and go into any other industries. And the reason for that was because it initially started with me and two other friends. And we were always like really interested in like, you know, like cute coffee shops and like
100%,
right? You know, you find like a cute coffee, even now, like you find a cute coffee shop, you go there, you sit there, you work all day, like the aesthetic, whatever. We always were kind of interested in the F&B industry, and in social media and in entrepreneurship. So then we were just like, why don't we just start an agency? So yeah, that started 3 years ago.
3 years ago?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And it's literally, by the way, it's 3 years ago, like this week.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
That must be such a nice feeling to look back on those 3 years
sure.
and just see it kind of from where you are now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
And the irony of it as well is actually, so I love a good pun. So actually even the name FREELANCE, it was me and two other friends.
Yeah.
So we kind of just thought, why don't we call it FREELANCE, like THR?
Yeah.
And it's been 3 years. So
it's just all coming together perfectly for this podcast, which I love. That's great. And I think just to give everybody a bit of an insight, we literally just met over Instagram, didn't we?
Yeah.
And that's so funny because I've said that with every single guest on this podcast, but I really like that. Yeah. And, you know, I love to see what other people are doing in social media, especially in the UAE. So it's great to see, you know, what you're doing. And I'm so glad that we can support each other with our own journeys.
For sure.
Now we're both at a point where we're kind of building our agencies. And I thought today in our conversation, we can give everyone listening a bit of an insight into what that journey has been like.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that it is not an overnight switch. It is something that is built over time, you know, first usually working in-house in social media for a brand or a business, and then moving first freelance and then into an agency.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about that journey? How did you, what was that like? What was that decision making like? Where did you find the confidence to just say, you know what, I can work for myself now from here on in?
So I think actually, like, if I really look back from such a young age, I think I always kind of had that whole like thing of wanting to do my own thing. Because I remember even after our last conversation before, I was thinking like, when did this actually start? And I remember being like the age of like 16, and I used to wear the hijab, so the scarf, right? And I was living in the UK. And my dad, he always used to kind of like push me to kind of like, you know, like get into business, like start a business.
Really?
So I remember him being like, look, here's £500. Why don't you start a business?
Wow.
So I ended up buying scarves from like China and selling them in the UK, because at that point it was really hard to find like scarves and stuff. So that's when the whole like entrepreneurial, I think, kind of side came out of me. But then in terms of starting freelancing and starting FREELANCE, it was more from like moving here 5 years ago and kind of like wanting to start a new life and wanting to start a life where I'm like independent, financially, emotionally, whatever else. And I'd kind of had like loads of different jobs over here, and each time I kind of got into a job, there was something like really unfortunate that happened. Like, for example, the first job I remember was getting into the job with a really low salary, but then kind of saying that they'd increase it over a certain period of time, and it never increased. The second time, like, the salary always got paid really late. The third time, the company crashed down. It was like a series of, I guess you could say, unfortunate events, which actually ended up being really fortunate in the end.
Well, that just goes to show that everything does happen for a reason, and it's great that you now have that outlook, because you've really found the positive, and that was, you know, essentially the push that you needed. And just as a side note on that, I think it's already so brave in itself that you've moved country, you know, ready to start your new journey and this new life that you've set out for yourself. But, you know, and on my podcast previously, we've talked a lot about making that move. There are going to be instances where it isn't the dream job that you wanted, and you are in a situation where you're thinking, okay, hang on, this isn't what I wanted. But the fact that that's pushed you on to, you know, something even bigger and better is so exciting.
Because even in those kind of situations, like even the whole moving to Dubai thing, for me, I think I was like 23 or 24. And for me, and it kind of touches on as well, like when you start your own business or when you start freelancing, for me, it was like you either sink or swim. So when I, for example, after the third time of like the really unfortunate events that happened, I was like, okay, either you go back to the UK or you stay over here. And I didn't have any savings at that point. So I was like literally, and I couldn't ask my parents for money. So I was literally so low on money. So I was like, either you suffer and you like just deal with it and like you try to find the next best thing, or you go back to the UK. But for me, going back to the UK was never an option. And it's kind of like the same with freelancing. So how I got into freelancing was, like I said, those kind of, you know, unfortunate events, the jobs, etc. And then like I kind of reached a point where I was like, do you know what? I just don't want to work for anyone anymore. Like I don't want to depend on anyone anymore. I don't want someone to kind of feel like they own me, because, you know, I have this whole thing as well with like time. Like time is so precious, right? Like you have one life and you're spending 8 hours per day, 5 days a week, right? Working towards making somebody else's dream come true, which is very selfless and whatnot. And but for me, I kind of just thought, but why don't I use those 7 hours to make my dream come true of being like financially independent and like having my own time, like not having to be in an office from like 9 to 5. So after those events kind of happened, I loved social media, and I was like, do you know what? Why don't I just try freelancing? Like, why don't I just try it? Like, what's stopping me? The fear that I'm not going to be good enough, the fear that perhaps I don't know enough about like social media or whatever. But I kind of just like watched YouTube videos online and watched people who did it before, right?
Yes, that's what I did. Yeah. And there's a couple of YouTubers that really helped me out. And I think, and that's another really great point to make, is that there is so much information out there. We can be inspired by other people's journeys and take their experiences, you know, into making decisions about what we want.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. I did the same thing. Yeah.
So watched loads of YouTube videos and then just started freelancing. It wasn't in F&B. Saw that it worked. At the same time, kind of opened 2 other businesses.
Okay.
Because at this point, I'd just watched Girl Boss on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
And I was so inspired. I was like, oh my God, no. Like, I'm going to work for myself.
If anybody hasn't seen Girl Boss on Netflix, this is the story of Sophia Amoruso. Is that right? She is the founder of Nasty Gal, the clothing label. And she had a real bootstrap start off in her business, really doing everything herself. It is a great watch, and it's also a good book. So
it was so inspiring for me, because I was literally at the point where, you know, when like, if anyone's seen it, like when she's in her little dingy apartment and she's got like pizza all over the place, and, like, you know, she doesn't know like how to, like, it's just so inspiring. And I think I read the book and I watched the series, and I was like, no, do you know what, that's it. Like, I'm gonna put the intention out there that I want to start my own thing. And I think it's so important as well to put an intention out there, like to kind of say to yourself, because, you know, you can plant the seed, but it takes years for the seed to grow. But if you don't plant the seed 3 years ago, then in 3 years time, the tree is not going to grow, you know.
100%.
So I think, like, for me, it was about putting that intention out there. Started 2 other e-commerce businesses online, and then kind of thought, you know, there's always hiccups along the way, right? So then I kind of thought, okay, I can't sustain myself just doing these things, and if I want to maintain the 2 online businesses, I have to get a job. I have to get some sort of income. So got a job again, and then again, I actually just think that like God just didn't want me to have a full-time job. Like,
it is what it is.
It is, because like after 3 months, it was the same thing. Like it was like a really bad experience, and then literally, I literally remember that last job that I had.
Yeah.
It was like my last chance. I was like, this is the last job that I'm gonna have.
Yeah.
Okay. So I remember quitting it, and I had zero savings. I literally just had the last paycheck, which, to be completely transparent, was like 12,000 dirhams. And like, the only option, I'd been in Dubai, I think now for 2.5 years or something. The only option was find another job, which for me was like not an option. I was like, I do not want to go back into that again.
Yeah.
Or go back to the UK. And I was like, it was a sink or swim moment.
Yeah. And that really pushed you on onwards. Yeah.
So then that's when literally I was just like, no, do you know what? There is no way that I'm going back to the UK. Not that there's anything wrong with the UK, by the way. I love it.
That's a fair point to make. We're not, we're not hating on any other kind of lifestyle, but I know what you mean, is that you've come here to start this life and you want to see it through and make those dreams reality.
I think everybody has a different purpose to moving over here. For me, like, moving over here meant a huge amount. Like, it meant, starting a new life, etc. So for me, going back to the UK represented failing. But again, like, I love the UK. Yeah, I'm always there. Yeah. But yeah, it was like a sink or swim moment where, like, literally I'm in the middle of the flipping ocean, and I was just like, either you start your own like freelancing business, and I sat there and I said to myself, okay. Because you always have to find kind of like a niche, I think, because there's so many agencies that exist, right?
This is a really key point, and I think we can get more into some details, but I think there's going to be a lot of people listening that really want to know specifics, especially in social media, because it's such a massive growing industry, as we both know. So 100%, I think finding your niche and what you do is such a great tip, and I'd love to give everyone some more tips, so stay tuned later in the episode. But I think it's really interesting what you said about just that feeling. You almost had an experience where you were pushed into it, and you really, I don't want to say from a negative, but almost from a really negative kind of, was in a job that you found quite negative, so it pushed you upwards and propelled you into that. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's interesting, because if anybody's listening to this and they're thinking, you know what, that's me, I'm really unhappy in my job. Yeah. How can you spin this into a positive? And it could be almost like the I think it's also interesting as well, because I think maybe a lot of people think, I used to think this, like when I used to see people like freelancing or having their own business, I used to think like it looks really easy, and you don't see like what they actually went through to reach that point. Did you, when you were in that final job, in that when you were like, right, I'm ready to do this now, did you have many contacts that you knew were freelancers? No. Okay.
God, I literally didn't know anyone.
So you didn't know anyone. That's really interesting. Because I think that phrase that you're a product of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I think that's quite interesting when you apply that to freelancing, because I think if you know someone personally that has done something, it already feels so much more achievable. So for you to not know anyone and to only have Girl Boss on Netflix and the YouTubers that are freelancing,
that's who I knew. I knew Girl Boss. That was literally
but you took that and then applied that to your situation. I really love that, and I think that's if I think if anyone that's listening is wanting to make that move but doesn't know anyone directly, I don't think that's an issue. That there's enough experience and inspiration out there to find it. You just got to hunt it a bit more.
Exactly. So that was that really. Basically, I kind of just sat there and I thought, okay, how can I start like an agency? Like, how can I start it? And I had 2 friends at the time.
Sorry to interrupt you. So from the get-go, it was always an agency. It wasn't you freelancing necessarily. It was always a business, because I think in social media there's a lot of overlap, but in most creative industries, most people will start as a solo freelancer. They are part of working with a team, but then making that step into an agency, that's like 2 in 1. So from the get-go, you were always like, I'm setting out to start an agency.
So it's a bit confusing, because basically we're called freelancers, and we were all freelancers. So at the time we were freelancing, but we thought, let's come together and turn it into a business.
Strength in numbers.
Exactly. So for example, one girl, she was involved with the graphic design. Another girl, she was involved in, let's say, the photography. So it was a bit of an overlap, right? But it kind of worked, because like we all kind of like had our own kind of like roles. And literally, like, I remember it was like the first week of starting it, and like to begin with, you don't know where to begin. And I was
Yeah.
like, do you know what, Sarah? Just go on Canva and make a logo. Just
Mm-hmm.
make a logo.
Yeah.
So I made a logo and then put together a company profile with all of our work collectively put together. And literally, a lot of people, I get a lot of questions on my Instagram, like, how did you start? How did you get your first client?
Yeah.
And my biggest advice is literally, like, not to quote Nike, but like, just do it.
Just do it. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I literally just went out there on my personal Instagram and reached out to cafes that I always wanted to work with.
Yeah.
And was like, hi, like, my name's Sarah. I freelance.
Yeah. And even you just saying that, this is what I'm doing, that's an element of just kind of faking it till you make it, isn't it?
That's what, there's a lot of, like, I think there's a lot of taboo around that, but you actually just have to do that.
You do need to say that this is the service you're offering. So what if you've not done it before, but you know, this is what you're setting out to do.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think that's really key. And again, I'm already can tell there's going to be a lot of juicy tips for anyone that is starting out.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to hear about your, that journey and that mindset you were in to transition. And I think it's interesting because it is quite different to mine. I would say I wasn't in a job that I hated at all. I really enjoyed the work that I was doing. My 2 jobs previous to starting my agency, I really, really loved. But there was something, again, I think kind of similar to what you were saying. I always loved the idea of having my own project and having my own freedom. And I just knew that I needed to get this experience from, you know, working in-house to then be able to go on and do my own thing.
Yeah.
So I think there's no right way, you know, to people listening. There's absolutely no right or wrong way. It's all just about taking what you can get from your situation and building it yourself, essentially, whether it's positive or negative. And I think I was really lucky that I was working with so many really inspiring women in business that they knew what they wanted, they had their projects, and I just thought that was so impressive. And I really feel like it rubbed off on me.
Yeah.
So I think that's almost what you were getting from, you know, when you were searching out those influences and content on YouTube, etc. So yeah, I think there's no right or wrong journey into freelancing.
And it's not like, at some points I feel like some goals are like unreachable. Like, it's not unreachable. It's okay, it's a difficult journey, yes. Yeah. But nothing is impossible. And I think I used to, for example, let's say watch a podcast like this and be like, oh, I wish I could reach that level, but I just don't feel like I can't, like that. I don't feel like I can, like, that's not me. Yeah. But then it's realizing that, like, anything is possible. Like, anything is possible. Like, we're no different to X, Y, and Z person, you know? Like, it's just more about, like, when you put your mind to doing something. And I don't know, I think for me it's, Yeah, I find it really exciting to look to people that have, you know, when you see someone and you consider them to have made it, you know, oh, they've made it, they're so successful, and then to remember that they started once, you know, they were at the beginning once, and to really just remember that if they can do it, more use it as inspiration. There's no envy, it's always inspiration. It's always okay, if they can do it, then I can as well. And that's really exciting and inspiring. Exactly. Okay, question for you. If your past self was here and we were talking to her as well, I bet she would be desperate to know what it's like. You know, now that you're 3 years in, what would you say to her? Would you say it's all it's cracked up to be? Is there anything that's completely not what you thought? Okay, that's a really good question. So, of course, with anything in life, there's like the pros and the cons, right? And I think you've just got to look at both the pros and the cons and see which ones outweigh the other. And that's different for different people, right? So in terms of, like, let's say being self-employed, right? So you working for yourself. The pros, I would say, I don't know if you agree, but the pros I would say is that you have your own, like, kind of like freedom to choose your clients, choose who you work with, choose who you know, like, choose what industry you want to work in. You have the freedom of your own time, like your free time, like, in the sense that, like, you don't have to wake up and work 9 to 5. You can wake up and work 6 to 12 and then go to the beach. But, like, and then also I think just the ability as well that, like, for me, the one thing as well that was really massive for me is that when you work for yourself, you kind of dictate what your salary is. So like, and it can be different from one month to the next. So, like, for example, 1 month could be like, I don't know, for example, like 20k, and then another month it's gone up to 60k. Whereas like if you were working like a full-time job, you'd have to wait how many years to get to 60k a month?
That's a really good point. And I think for a lot of people, it usually is money orientated, which is normal. You know, we're not working for free. That is natural to have goals and ambitions. One of the things that I really found really frustrating about working in-house and in a full-time role is that I felt like I could go in and do my absolute best, work super hard, do a great job 1 month, and then I could do, I was going to swear then, I'm not going to swear, but I could do a rubbish job and, you know, not put any effort in. And I found it so frustrating that it would be consistent. And for some people, they're looking for security.
That's
totally valid.
Massive
totally
thing.
valid. You know, 100%. If you need security and you're somebody that wants to know what they're getting paid every single month, 100%. That is going to be a pro for you. But for me, that was a con, because I just felt like, where can I go? You know, I was absolutely itching to do more, and I felt like I could give more. So it's a really interesting point that you made about
pros. I feel like are equally cons, which
That's
is nuts,
so true,
because like even what you're saying about stability, I always talk about this, because like the good thing about having a job is that you do have that stability, that you know that at the end of every month you're getting X amount of salary, right? And like, for example, if you're getting fired or whatever, then it's, you know, like there's a process, right? Whereas with freelancing, I remember like back in the day, and even like when you're running like your own business, right, there isn't always a sense of stability unless you put contracts down, right? Which I think is a really smart thing to do. If anyone starts freelancing, you have to put a contract down.
Yes, there's so many do's and don'ts. Yeah, we've been through it and we've learned.
Always put a contract down. And I think, I don't know about you, but like the way that we kind of work is like always take a payment up front, whether that's 50% or whatever, but that's a whole different story.
There's so many, like I said, there's so many other tips. We're going to have to put a little section in just for tips. But I think back to the pros and cons. For sure, flexibility of salary and earnings, and not having a limit. Essentially, the only limit is your capabilities. But then that being said, that is a con, because you know, I remember my first 6 months, even really early on into my freelancing journey, I said yes to everything. I took on absolutely everything. I took on so much, and I was broken. I was doing 12-hour days every single day. And on the one hand, it excited me because I thought, wow, this is amazing. So much opportunity. I'm doing what I love. I'm earning so much, tripled my salary from working in-house. But then I was literally so anxious, so stressed, and obviously if I had been in a full-time position, it wouldn't have got to that point. You know, there's not, you know, there's only so much work to be done. 100% agree that the pros are the cons as well.
I think there's this meme online where it's like, I left my 9 to 5 to work
24/7.
24/7. That's
so true.
It can really be like that, but
I
guess the pro to that is that you're working, okay, not necessarily 24/7, but like you're working longer hours to make your own dream come true, which in the future will pay off eventually. Whereas like, I feel like at times, you know, it's interesting you mentioned about like when you were working before, and like even when it comes to working, by the way, like 9 to 5 and whatever, I don't see that as like a bad, like every like chapter of your life serves a purpose, and like
so true,
and everyone's different. Like I don't think that like, you know, everyone would want to like work for themselves. Like sometimes it serves someone to just do a 9 to 5. I don't know, like back in the day, that's what served me, is doing a 9 to 5, right? But doing that, like I think the other thing that just really just did not sit right with me is that, for example, like working for an agency, right? So you work for an agency, and let's say this agency gets paid 40k a month from 4 clients, but they're paying you 10k a month, but you're doing all the work. That just did not sit right. I was like, no, why can't I get 4 clients, get the 40k a month myself, and do, it's the same thing, but I'm just getting the clients myself, you know? So I think, like the pros and cons, like there's so many, and I think, but even what you just mentioned there, that you obviously got that insight from working, and I think when I was in-house, I was just soaking everything in, learning what everyone's job role is, what everyone did,
And 100%, that was so right for that chapter in my life, because I was absolutely new to the world of marketing, the world of business,
just learn a lot from it.
Learned so much. So I was really in a learning stage, and I knew I needed to be in that environment just to learn.
Yeah.
And I really did. So I really value that time. But at the same time now, I feel like I'm in a chapter where I'm really ambitious and I'm excited to, you know, hit these goals that I'm setting for myself.
Exactly.
On the one side of thing, on the other side, I'm also, you know, I'm in my 20s. I want to travel. I want to have freedom to work from wherever I want to work. And I'm loving that. So it's kind of like 100% what you said. It's, you know, the right opportunity for wherever you're at in your life. There is absolutely not, it's not to say one is better than the other at all.
Not at all. And I actually think that, like, now after COVID, I actually think that, like, 9-to-5s will not actually become 9-to-5s. Like, they'll start to transform, and it will be like, because already a lot of people are working from home or whatever, right?
The values have changed, haven't they? And I think for me, I definitely consider COVID being one of the reasons that I wanted to have this freedom, just because it's almost like we got a taste of not you know, being slaves to this 9-to-5 office culture. And I was like, no, I want this, I want that, I want that life. I don't want to do.
Exactly.
So it is interesting and it is changing. So with all that in mind, could you see yourself going back to a full-time position in the future?
No.
No. Okay, that was a nice and quick answer. Okay,
that part done. No, I'm joking. No, I actually just think, like, once you've tasted it, once you've tasted having your own time and your own time being your time. But what I mean by that is in the sense that, like, you're still doing the same work as a 9-to-5, but you kind of dictate when you do that, right? I just can't see myself ever being able to go back to kind of like, why weren't you in the office at 9:10? Or do you know what I mean? Or, like, for example, like, I don't know. I can't see myself ever going back to that. I think it's really hard once you've come out of it to then go back in a position where your time is not your time. And, you know, like, what about you though?
I think I'm 90% no, but I really am never say never, because I do think I would love to one day be in a position where I am in a senior management role and being part of a really great team. That maybe I'll build it myself, maybe it'll be part of somebody else's. But I think, just as you said, every chapter has its moment.
Exactly.
I do love what I'm doing right now though. I absolutely love it. So right now it's a no, but I'm a never say never type person. Okay, so what I really like about where we're both at in our careers is that it is quite similar. And I think one thing that I'm currently going through, and I wonder if this is the same for you, is when it comes to moving yourself up the kind of career ladder in a way, when you're working for yourself, it is difficult in itself, because we kind of get so caught up in the day-to-day, responsibilities of client work, etc. It's really hard to view the big picture. And I think one thing that I've been really focusing on is delegating and trusting a team to help. And we've also spoken just now about not wanting to kind of, this is maybe going off on a tangent, but I still want to mention it, is that we've also spoken about not wanting to feel like you're on somebody else's time. So with that value, it's now trying to delegate, but in this kind of new way of working that suits our what we want.
Because I think at first as well, I don't know about your experience, but at first it's almost like you're doing everything, because as a small business, like, you're literally the marketing team, you're the sending the invoices, everything, right? Business development, like everything, right? So I think at first it's like, it kind of starts off like that, but then after a while, especially when you can see the potential in, like, growing, right? So for example, let's say at first, if you start off having 4 clients and you're, like, managing all of it from the social media to everything else, when you see the value in growing your business and, like, let's say hiring other people like to join your team, like, that's then the next step that I feel like is important to take. Because I don't know, for me it's all about, like, wanting to turn it into something that's, like, a lot bigger than it is now.
I think, because I have that same ambition as well, to build my team and to make it bigger than what it is. But it's so difficult, isn't it, to kind of step outside of those day-to-day tasks. You get used to doing everything yourself, that then it's really hard to take the like take that wide angle view and be like, hang on, what do I actually want to achieve by the end of the year, for example, and how can we get there? What support do I need? And that's another tip I'd say to anybody that's in a similar position, is remembering to have those times where you're like, okay, hang on, let's not get too comfy where we are, because we still want to get to the next step.
Exactly.
Okay, shall we move on to some advice for people that are wanting to go freelance / start an agency? And I'm going to lump the two together because I do think they often go hand in hand. It's essentially about this confidence to leave the security of your
job.
And I think we're obviously talking from a social media marketing point of view, but I think so many creative industries are very much the same. Let's start with what we briefly touched on before, which is getting those first clients. What would be your advice there to how do you start?
So for me, it was literally, I'd say my biggest advice is literally just write down a list of the clients that you would love to work with, right? And I know it always sounds like such simple advice, but I really think just do it. Like literally just reach out, because at the end of the day, what's the worst thing that could happen is that they turn around and they say like, okay, we're not interested, for example. And that's absolutely fine. Like, like just move on to the next one that you kind of always wanted to work with. So I know it sounds like a bit of a like, I don't know, black and white advice, but I just say like, literally you've literally sometimes got to just go into it hard and like just reach out.
Okay.
What about you?
I think very much so. I think it's faking it till you make it is part of it, which we already mentioned. I love that you highlighted that moment where you made your logo and made the business kind of profile. I think interestingly, I actually did that like 6 months in, because I got carried away with doing the client work. I was in a position where I was freelancing on the side of my job, getting this experience, and that just kind of really rooted that I knew this is what I wanted to be doing. And then I was busy with the client work and just loving it, but then it got to a point where I was like, okay, hang on, who are we? We're going to be a team now. We need a name, we need a website.
It was the same, like we literally, I think we didn't actually have an Instagram page until a year in.
Really? Yeah.
And the website was literally only done like a year and 6 months ago, I think. It's when you're growing at a faster pace, right?
And I think so many people think it's the other way around. They think, oh, okay, I can't start until I've got a name and until I've got a website and until I've got an Instagram. And I feel like saying, no, like you need to start by doing some of the services. And if you're really worried about not being able to get a client, this is what I always say to people, especially if it's social media, is if you're thinking, okay, you've got no experience, you need to just make your own experience. Social media is so accessible. You need to start a page for a fake cafe or a fake product or a reviews page, and get an understanding of using the tools, using the platforms, and that is then becomes your case study for your portfolio.
But also I think a lot of it is about like having faith that like that things will work out, because I remember the first client that we got, and it was like, I think it was literally 4 days in to sending some messages, and imagine sending it from my personal Instagram account. And this was a client that like I loved their branding, and I was like, I would love, and like she literally was like, yeah, sure, let's go for it. And she took the biggest package, and I was like, that moment,
such a good feeling,
right? It's such a good feeling, but like that would have never happened if I sat there and thought, no, I'm not.
I hope somebody knows that I want to. It's almost like you can't just sit there and think that people are gonna come to you. It might get to that point, and I think once you've been working in and providing great work and being the best freelance you can be, then that does happen. They do come to you,
and over time, like I don't know if it's most likely probably been the same with you, but like at first, like when you first start, okay, yes, you're new, you're fresh, and like maybe not that many people will know about you, but over time, if you continue what you're doing, people will start to come to you and be like, oh, you're freelancers, or oh, you're Mabel, I've heard about you, like
it's word
I
of
really
mouth,
want to work with
100%.
Right?
I've definitely found that as well, and that's a great feeling. I think people are often really scared that there's not going to be the need for what they're doing, but it's absolutely not true, and there is opportunities out there, so it's just going after them. I really like that as a piece of advice. I think really interesting as well what we said about the, you know, not feeling like you need to have everything figured out first. You just need to start. We should be sponsored by Nike. Just do it. Just do it.
Every episode should be called Just Do It.
Just do it. Yeah, okay, perfect. As a side note, for anyone that is needing some more support about finding clients, I do have a course called Client Fishing that is about how you can identify and bring in those dream clients, you know. Actually, here's a question for you. So have you know, I briefly mentioned at the start, I would just say yes to everything. What would be your advice to somebody that it feels like they have to accept these clients that they're unsure about, if it's, you know, they're not sure?
So I think like at first, like when you first start, you kind of do feel like you need to take all of them on because it's like the experience. And it's also like any money that you get at first is good, right? But I think over time, the way that we kind of like work now is that we don't take just any client on. And what I mean by that, it's not, I don't mean it in an arrogant way at all, but I mean it more like, you know, when you know your style of work and you know this brand style of work, you kind of have to sit there and think, do we mesh together? Can I provide you with what you're looking for? Type of thing, right? So I think, I don't know, my advice, it might be different for everyone, but I don't think you don't have to take every client on. Like also like, because a lot about freelancing as well, okay, it's great to have that extra bit of money in, but do you enjoy it? Will you enjoy working for this client?
This is the point that I wanted to make, because I was accepting everything and anything, so excited by the fact that somebody wanted me to help them with their business. But then it got to a point where I was like, I'm not actually enjoying this. And the whole point of what I was doing was to enjoy what I'm doing. And now I really live by the rule, if it's not hell yes, it's a no. You know? If it's not exciting, you are not going to, you know, self-motivate yourself to do great work as a freelancer that is not got a manager breathing down their neck. You know, you need to self-motivate. So if you're not loving it, it's not going to get done. That is a big learning curve that I hit in the first year of working for myself.
Because there's also so many different types of clients as well, right? So like, let's say, and I think that's also the good thing and the freedom with working for yourself is that you get to accept, this is a client I want to work with, this is not. Because for example, you can get a client that's super chill, they're coming to you because they like your work, they trust your work, so they're not going to be micromanaging, they've paid you, they've looked for an expert, you're an expert, here do the work. But then there'll be other types of clients, for example, that will be the complete opposite, which will be like micromanaging it, but you have the chance, you don't have to accept, like, you know, because I think also as a freelancer or being self-employed, like you don't have to accept everyone, like you don't have to, you kind of dictate what you do and do not want to accept,
for sure,
you know.
I totally agree. I want us to give one more piece of advice, and it's quite a difficult one but a juicy one. We've already talked a little about how we can grow our salary. What advice do you give for somebody when pricing their work and pricing their services?
So I think at first, again, in my experience, like what I kind of did, I'm not going to lie, I made the pricing super competitive at first, because when you first start, and let's say you haven't got that much experience, you haven't got a massive like client base behind you, then like it does make it a little bit more difficult for you to pitch to a client when your rates are the same price as someone who's got a lot more experience than you, right? So I think at first, like you kind of have to be a little bit generous with your pricing, but still price it in a way where like it's worth it, you know? Like,
for sure. Because otherwise, again, you're not going to be that motivated.
Exactly.
You're not going to be self-motivated.
But then I think after a while, once you've built your client base, once you've built your portfolio, you know your worth. Like, you know that X, Y, and Z clients have worked with me, which therefore means that, okay, I must be a valuable, you know, like asset. And I think that's when you start to increase your pricing. But my biggest thing with pricing is like, at the end of the day, it's a bit like dating, like you know your worth, okay? For example, I know that my work is like this, and I know it produces this X amount of results, right? So even if you have this imposter syndrome, like for example, I can't charge X amount because they might not accept it. Okay, well that's not a client that I want to work with anyway then. Or for example, with dating, I know my worth, okay? Like if that person's not going to accept, you know, like what I'm asking of them, then that's not someone that I want to be with anyway, right? So I think it's the same thing. Like, don't sell yourself short. Like it's hard, of course, with imposter syndrome and whatever, but I think just, yeah. What about you? What would you say is?
I'd say you need to ask for slightly more than you feel comfortable with asking, and then most of the time the client will go for it. So that is something that I'm still working on myself. But that's my advice for pricing your work. We are running out of time, even though I could literally continue chatting with you for so long. But to anybody, I'm going to put Sarah's Instagram and info in the description. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been so great to share your journey with everyone.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's been amazing as well. Thank you.
Thank you.